Welcome to Reddit War Room Podcast. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a fascinating corner of the internet today, exploring something you might not often think about.
Right.
What actually happens to old government property, particularly in the military?
Right.
We pulled a stack of sources specifically from the Military Stories subreddit, where service members are sharing some truly wild, often humorous, and sometimes, well, surprisingly insightful tales about government gear and how it gets handled, or perhaps more accurately, mishandled.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is how these very personal, ground-level stories offer this incredible sort of unfiltered window into the massive logistical challenges
Yeah.
and the maybe unique culture of managing resources within an organization as vast and complex as the military. Our mission in this deep dive isn't just to recount these anecdotes, but to really try and extract the key insights, see what patterns emerge,
Definitely. Understand the often unseen realities behind official property disposal and
Sure,
control.
that's
So let's start with a story that really seemed to kick off this whole conversation thread. It takes us back to 2007 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay.
The narrator was an MP attached to an air defense unit, part of this small skeleton crew left behind, while the main unit was off training at NTC, that's the National Training Center.
Right. Big training exercise out in California.
Exactly. Their job, simple but definitely not fun. Clear out old barracks furniture from a building that was being renovated. Moving furniture is never fun, right?
I know, especially not heavy, awkward barracks furniture. And the official process for dealing with old stuff like this, as outlined in regulations, is usually pretty standard. You inventory it, figure out if it's salvageable.
Right, and then maybe auction it off through official channels like the Defense Logistics Agency. Try to make a few bucks back for the government.
That's the plan on paper, yeah.
Yeah.
The proper way to handle surplus.
But bureaucracy, as it often does, met the reality of a tedious, back-breaking task. The soldiers, faced with carrying incredibly heavy, stubborn pieces, bunks, mattresses, dressers, down multiple flights of stairs and open tiers, well, they started looking for an easier way.
And they found one, apparently.
Oh, yeah. The narrator describes hearing this sudden, loud crash outside. Stepping out, they found soldiers who had clearly decided that carrying was, well, not the preferred method. Instead, they were gleefully tossing mattresses, bunks, other furniture right over the railing, down multiple stories into this growing pile below. The source actually says the sight was oddly satisfying.
Oddly satisfying. That tells you something, doesn't it? About the frustration, maybe.
For sure. And this immediately raises an important question, I think, about human nature when you're faced with unpleasant tasks inside these rigid systems.
Right. Presented with extreme physical difficulty, a task nobody wanted, an unofficial, very destructive, but clearly easier solution emerged.
And the reaction, this is where it gets even more interesting. A captain appears, sees this absolute chaos furniture literally raining from the sky.
Oh boy.
But instead of stopping it or demanding accountability, he just sort of hurries off.
Just walks away. Wow. Possibly to distance himself, maybe just overwhelmed, or maybe just deciding it wasn't his battle right then.
Yeah, that captain's reaction really highlights the tightrope leaders' walk sometimes when they see minor rule bending happening, or maybe not so minor in this case.
Definitely not minor if it's raining dressers.
Right. The narrator then says they actually joined in for a bit, took a lunch break, didn't even bother going back, and weren't questioned about it afterwards. Though they wouldn't be surprised, they note, if someone did eventually get in trouble. It just drives home how even in a super structured environment like the military, things don't always go by the book.
And sometimes people look the other way, either actively or passively. Or maybe they just physically can't be everywhere to enforce every single rule, especially with something like this.
Exactly. And honestly, part of it has to be the sheer scale of the task they were given. Barracks full of furniture, even the official methods can get slow and overwhelmed.
Yeah, it creates the conditions for these kinds of, let's call them ad hoc solutions, to pop up.
So this Fort Sill story really blew up the thread, sparked a lot of responses. It shows that while that specific scene might be unique, the general theme of unexpected property disposal is definitely not.
No, experiences vary, but the underlying challenges seem pretty consistent across the board.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these stories show there are many different ways, both official and decidedly unofficial, that excess or old gear gets handled.
Right. One comment from someone at Fort Drum shared their experience. They mentioned having contractors come in, haul stuff to the base dump.
Okay.
There, they'd chip the wood, recycle metal, mattresses, that kind of thing. They noted furniture was often replaced on a set life cycle, like maybe every 7 years for a dresser.
Makes sense.
But because units were deployed so often, the furniture in the barracks wasn't always actually worn out when it was time for replacement.
Ah, so good stuff getting cost. This commenter really honed in on that, the perceived waste of money, paying contractors to discard items that were still perfectly good.
Yeah, they had what sounds like a sensible idea. Suggest giving, say, 3 pieces of surplus furniture to junior enlisted folks E5 and below.
People who could actually use a free desk or dresser.
Exactly. But they said, JJ, the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the lawyers shot the idea down.
Wow, that jaggy detail, it's fascinating, isn't it? What stands out to you about that contrast? Paying to trash good stuff versus being told you can't just give it away?
Well, it zeroes in on how, in a large, risk-averse environment, potential accountability issues can just shut down practical ideas.
Like liability.
Exactly. Liability, tracking who got what if it breaks later. It's often bureaucratically easier and safer to just pay someone to make it disappear, even if that means trashing mountains of usable goods.
Just to avoid the paperwork or potential problems.
Pretty much. And this commenter also mentioned the sheer quantity can overwhelm even trying to donate it locally. The formal system, designed for control, often ends up being incredibly inefficient and wasteful on the ground.
And despite those official hurdles, we see evidence that an informal market pops up anyway.
Right. Another comment mentioned seeing a store near Fort Hood, this was back in 2020, that literally stocks barracks furniture they somehow got their hands on.
No kidding.
Yeah, and this person even said they've bought stuff there themselves to help out junior soldiers who needed it. It really shows that despite the rules, there's a real demand and an unofficial supply chain. The property finds its way out, one way or another.
Even if it's not through the intended channels like auctions or official donations.
Correct.
But this whole culture of informal property management isn't just about big furniture, is it? We saw stories about smaller stuff too, like tools, even vehicles.
Oh yeah, definitely. We hear about a Navy Master Chief's dad whose garage was supposedly better equipped than dealership service departments.
Implying tools maybe found their way home over a long career.
That's the strong implication, and it's not unique. Another story specifically mentions electricians' tool pouches being conveniently lost right when someone's leaving the service.
Often after being, shall we say, creatively filled beforehand.
Precisely. It's almost like an unofficial perk or compensation that develops outside the formal system.
That definitely adds a layer of resourceful, let's say, bending of the rules. There's also that great story from a Perry-class frigate. The KMO, the commanding officer, decided the electronics techs and sonar techs had too many tools.
Okay, during like an inspection.
Yeah, zone inspection. He basically ordered that half the tools just needed to go away, said they had too many kits per person.
What happened?
Over time, guess what? Those tools quietly went home with sailors rotating off the ship. Eventually, they got replaced on board with shared consolidated tool chests.
That's fascinating because it shows how sometimes even an official directive like a CO saying, get rid of this excess gear can unintentionally lead to property just walking off.
Right. By forcing an informal solution, make it go away, the path of least resistance for the crew was often just taking it home when they left.
Makes sense in a weird way.
Now, while some stories involve getting away with it or finding these workarounds, others shared in the thread show that bending the rules significantly, absolutely can have consequences.
Yeah, there's always a risk. An older story, this one from the early 1960s, gives a clear example. A detail was assigned to scrap some older model Jeeps.
Okay, standard procedure.
Except instead of just processing them, they decided to have a little demolition derby for fun before sending them off.
Oh no, unauthorized destruction for entertainment.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting and goes wrong. Their crucial mistake. They accidentally destroyed a Jeep that turned out not to be obsolete. It shouldn't have been in the scrap pile at all.
Ouch. Big mistake. What happened?
The consequence. The source states it bluntly. Many Article 15s were distributed.
Article 15s.
Mm.
Non-judicial punishment.
Yes.
So real discipline.
Yep. Unlike the Fort Sill furniture toss, where the narrator apparently wasn't questioned, getting caught in a demo derby, especially with the wrong vehicle, had very formal repercussions.
It really underscores that while informal stuff happens all the time, there's definitely still a line. Severity matters.
Absolutely. Destruction of valuable assets like vehicles, especially ones not even authorized for disposal, that clearly crossed the line and led to formal action. Very different from tossing old mattresses.
And sometimes the issues aren't even about grand destruction or valuable tools, but incredibly minor, everyday things. That also tells you something about how strict the rules are on paper.
Like the Marine story.
Yeah, the Marine who almost got in serious trouble for just setting a government bedside table out by the dumpster during field day, barracks cleaning.
Just put it by the trash.
Yep.
Yeah.
Corporals had to step in, explain destruction of government property, and made the soldier lug it all the way back up to their room on the 3rd floor.
Wow. It highlights how strict the rules technically are, even for seemingly trivial stuff. The fact that it ended up being a lesson learned without paperwork, though.
Right. It suggests that informal correction, on-the-spot training, is also a big part of the system for minor things.
It's a different outcome from Fort Sill, where nobody seemed to face immediate formal consequences. Suggests it really depends on who sees what, their rank, and how they choose to handle it right then and there.
Definitely situational. Finally, there's that slightly different kind of story, but still about discarded goods. The narrator doing a security check, driving through a parking lot.
And finds what?
Finds really nice stuff just sitting outside a dumpster, like a new fishing pole, a Swiffer mop, even an RX-8 car seat.
Huh. And they took it home?
Yep, took it home.
Okay, so that connects back to the theme of waste, maybe, but not always intentional destruction of government property.
Right, could be soldiers just ditching personal items when moving out, or maybe government stuff disposed of improperly but not actively smashed or tossed off a balcony.
It's just another way usable goods, whatever their origin, end up outside the formal system and available to whoever finds them.
So what does this all mean when we pull together? We've heard stories from, chaotic furniture tossing and vehicle demolition derbies.
To quietly lost tools walking out the door, bedside tables causing headaches, and finding perfectly good stuff by the dumpster.
These diverse anecdotes from military stories, they paint a really rich, complex picture, don't they?
They really do. They show us a world where the official, often super strict procedures for property control exist right alongside this deeply ingrained culture of informal practices.
And these practices are driven by all sorts of things. Necessity, opportunity, sometimes just boredom, or feeling like the official way is just too inefficient.
It really highlights that human element interacting with strict rules and just vast, often unwieldy amounts of resources.
Sometimes it leads to resourceful repurposing, sometimes to casual disregard or destruction.
And sometimes, especially when lines are clearly crossed or someone important is watching, it leads to formal consequences. It's this complex, often messy reality behind the neat org charts of a huge organization like the military.
The sheer volume of property and the day-to-day demands just create both opportunities and incentives for handling things outside the textbook.
Yeah.
It's been a truly fascinating deep dive into the unexpected ways military property gets handled, all thanks to these candid stories shared on Our Military Stories.
Definitely. From that almost unbelievable furniture toss at Fort Sill to the subtle reasons Jaggy might say no to giving away furniture and those surprising dumpster finds.
These anecdotes give us a much richer, more human picture of property management than any official regulation ever could.
We've seen how different branches, different eras, they all have their own versions of dealing with surplus or unwanted gear. But there's this consistent tension, isn't there, between the strict rules on paper and the practicalities and, well, human nature on the ground.
These personal accounts provide genuinely valuable insight into the culture and realities of managing resources on such a massive scale. Thanks for joining us for this exploration.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. Given the staggering scale of resources, the military manages everything from pens and paper clips to tanks and aircraft carriers. How much unofficial reallocation, creative disposal, or even destruction of property do you think happens every single day that we never hear about? And what does that widespread existence of informal systems really say, not just about the military, but maybe about the fundamental nature of all large organizations and the people trying to navigate the rules and realities?